Okay, greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pan-African Community News Network. It's the 26th of February, 2023. I am Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu. I'm in the studio here in London with the wonderful sister Oleander. Hopefully you'll be able to see on the screen. So say hi. Are you there?
Greetings, everybody.
Brilliant.
Hope everybody's well.
Definitely. And you know how you can let us know? You can send us a message via Facebook or YouTube. And I think you've got a comment system and the chat stuff, and Sister Oleander will be looking after that. And if you have something to say, a comment to make, or a question to ask, please feel free. It's always good to let us know that you can hear us okay as well, and that you can see everything all right. So, while you're listening and while you're getting ready and sitting down and grabbing your cup of tea or whatever it is, that's your little tipple while we go through this broadcast, please just put something in the chat just to say that, the audio is fine and the image is fine, just so we know that we are not broadcasting out to nowhere. Even if you miss part of the program, it's always available as a pre-recording afterwards, so it doesn't really matter. It's not perfect, but if we know straight away, we can make tweaks to make sure that the final recording is good. And with that all said, I'm going to start, as we always do, with the first part of the program, which is where we look at libations, and it's the section about We Remember. And for those of you who are fans of hip hop, in fact, you don't even need to be a fan of hip hop, you just need to listen to music, then you probably heard about the tragic passing of Chagai the Dove, also known as Plug 54 from the group De La Soul. Now, he passed away at the age of 54, and he was known very much so as a disruptor of the industry. De La Soul, I mean, there's a classic track, Me, Myself and I, which everyone tends to remember. But he'd been going around doing work, before and after that. And he was very successful. And it's quite sad that he passed away so young. He had been open about his struggles with his congestive heart failure and issues, but unfortunately he didn't make it. So we remember Togoy the Dove. The next We Remember libation is to someone else actually in the world of entertainment, which is the former Ghana winger called Chris Atsu, and he passed away at an even younger age of 31. Now, many of you would have heard about the awful earthquakes, and I say earthquakes with an S, that's been hitting Turkey and Syria. It's been hitting both nations. I think at the last count, there was something like 10,000 deaths, bodies recovered from there, and I think they're still going on. There's this human rights crisis in Syria because of the West's hypocrisy in the way it deals with aid in these kind of like humanitarian crises. But this particular We Remember is about our brother Chris Atsu. He played over 100 games for Newcastle and had some games with Chelsea, Everton and Bournemouth. Like I said, I'm not a football fan, so I don't know all the details. But what I do know of him was that he was one of the country's most leading athletes and kind-hearted philanthropists. He was very popular amongst Ghanaians and had dozens of mourners. His body was returned to Ghana very recently. I read some work that he'd been doing, some comments he made. He was building a school because he knew about the importance of education. He was helping in initiatives to deal with peace and disarmament. He was just a lovely young man, and to lose his life so young is, again, it's another tragedy. So we remember Chris Atsu at the age of 31. You are here watching the Pan-African Community News Network, and we're just going through some of the stories as they affect us over the last couple of weeks. And now I'm going to go into a section that we generally refer to as...
Sorry, Toyin, just to say that Sister Amapoku just says that she can actually hear us well and see us well.
Excellent.
And good evening.
Greetings and thank you. Thank you
Um,
for letting us know. Is that okay?
mhm.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go on to the news. Everything we cover has actually taken place within the last fortnight, just so that you are aware. And sometimes it may sound repetitive, but it's repetitive because often what's happening is we're caught in this cycle of bad news seemingly being perpetual. So the first story I'm going to go to is there's been some new analysis by the Inquest organization, which has revealed that African people are 7 times more likely than those of European heritage to die after police restraint. Now, I mean, we talk about this all the time, but again, it's good that we have this data. It's good that we have this analysis. And Inquest, which is a charity that helps bereaved families after fatal consequences that occurred with contact with the police or the state. They put a lot of freedom of information requests and did enough kind of analysis and worked out that this problem has not gone away. They've even said that there's never been a case where an officer has been found to have acted in a racist or discriminatory way after death in custody or in contact. So I think there've been a rare case where officers have actually been prosecuted, but never on the issue of racist. It'll be about misconduct or some other kind of case. So just sharing this news, unfortunately, it's an ongoing situation. It's not new, but we have to keep it up. We have to keep the focus. Things don't get better unless we keep them out in the spotlight. The next story is directly from the new police chief, and his name is Mark Rowley, and he is saying, I think what we would know is the quite obvious, alongst the lines of is water wet, that stop and search can cost trust from communities that are, I'd say, assaulted by them. He didn't say that. I said assaulted by them. Now, he was doing one of these PR rounds in a church. I think it's the Welsh City Church in Brixton. And he admitted, again, a water wet moment, that the relationship between the police and the African community in the UK was amongst the worst that it has ever been. I don't know if it's just the worst it's ever been. I think it's just the same situation as it has always been. I think it gets worse when well, I'm not going to even try and quantify things. But again, while it sounds positive, he's also parroting statements about that officers can carry out stop and searches if they have reasonable grounds, if they think that they're carrying weapons or drugs. And so it's the same thing about recognizing that stop and search is a problem. It's used discriminately, it's used badly, but always at the other side of the mouth, justifying why it's used, and as if we are always subjected to this reasonable grounds logic from officers who are on the street. We know that's not the case. I'm not going to have a go at him today because he is involved in a good policy, which is looking at corruption in the police, and he has been true to his word for as far as I can see, as in rooting out some of the worst offenders. I have my issues about the focus still not really prioritizing issues around racism and Afrophobia, and a lot of it's been motivated because of the focus on misogyny, which is good. It's good that they're looking at that, but I don't have a sense that racism and Afrophobia in particular is driving these kind of actions. But I am thankful for what's taking place, even though it is quite traumatizing to hear of the disgusting behavior police officers have been getting away with for the last few decades. Okay, let's go to the next section of our program, which we call UK General News. Again, remember, we are live on YouTube and Facebook, so if you have a comment to make, or something you want to say, feel free. Sister Oleander is monitoring the chats. and you are welcome to ask a comment, pass a comment, ask a question, and or just to say greetings. That's cool. But I'm going to move on with the stories because we've got quite a few to go through today. The next one is about one of those reforms I'm talking about. This is not necessarily down to Rowley, but this is something that's quite good. And this is that there's been movement on, I think it's called Jenga, which is this racist law, which uses joint enterprise to criminalize people who are near other groups or other people who are involved in criminality. And what's going to happen apparently now is that people, prosecutions and convictions under that, and it is a racist law. I mean, they're going to be monitored. Whether this leads to meaningful change is another issue. But like I said, the first step is actually monitoring what the problem is and getting evidence to see what's going on. Now, there is some background to this. We now know that nearly 60% of young men serving 15 years or more in prison for these Jenga or joint enterprise convictions are either of African, Asian, or other minority ethnic backgrounds. So there's a strong, racializing bias in the way that the law is applied. Now, the Crown Prosecution Service, that's the CPS, they will monitor the data, and they'll make sure they run some of the data alongside the ethnicity, the ethnic identity of those who are prosecuted. And this is what's new. This is what's going to be done for the first time. I don't know the ins and outs of why they make a decision. I do know that this is a result of a legal challenge. And so this is when I always, kind of like had to just watch things with a bit of caution. So this is a great step that's taken forward. But if they had to be dragged to this progressive action through a legal challenge, through the courts or through the threat of litigation, then it would still imply that the corrupt system, the corrupt officers, the corrupt policies are still in play. So this is a good story, like I said, but let's not really start dancing on the streets quite yet, because we have seen many people convicted of murder or manslaughter, even if they didn't play a part in the crime, just simply because they know or are nearby the person or persons involved in the violent act. And that's got to be addressed. The next story is about the BAFTA Awards. And this is a really, I don't even know if it's an interesting one. I don't think it's actually very surprising, or it shouldn't be surprising to those of you who have been watching entertainment industry and its awards journey, whether it's on this side of the pond or the American Oscars. But last week, BAFTA Awards went off. There was something like, I think 40% of nominations from people from minority ethnic backgrounds. But well, behold, surprise, surprise, there was no one of African heritage. I mean, it was a complete, when I say whitewash, literally means whitewash, people of European heritage who cleaned up winning on this. Now, I know there's some arguments about actually the awards about excellence and not tokenism, and I do hear that. I don't want anyone of African heritage to be given an award simply because they're African. I want them to be given an award if they want to take an award because their work is excellent. But the problem is, as we found out with the Oscars, is that the people who make these decisions, who award these trinkets, they seem to have blinkers in their eyes. They seem to somehow not see diversity of practice. And that's what we're often talking about. The way that acting takes place, that screenwriters and taking play representation is done. They don't see that as something that's worthy of awarding. And I think that actually, while we're talking about the lack of diversity in the award system, I think we actually should be looking about the lack of diversity. And I'm talking about cultural, social, and political diversity. I don't know who makes up the panel, but we need to be looking at that factor in BAFTA itself, in those who are engaged in organising the proceedings, because this will continue to happen over and over and over again until the very structure that puts this on every year actually is transformed and actually has the cultural intelligence, has the social capital, has the creative insight to actually award excellent, not just status quo, not just kind of like new renditions of the same story, So this is, the story that went out this week. And like I said, I didn't actually think I'd talk about this, but actually, if we look beyond the headlines, which is everyone's focusing on, and look at actually what does this say about the institution that sets this up, that's where the real story is. Now, the next story is one that pees me off a bit, actually. I don't know if you've heard, or you probably heard about this. Hopefully, I mean, it's difficult to miss. Thankfully, the media has been covering it. This is the story about our sister, the wonderful activist, Dr. Shola Mos Ashok-Bamimu, and the fact that she has received death threats. I mean, and when I say death threats, I'm not exaggerating, I'm not engaging in hyperbolic rhetoric. She has received death threats sent in a letter to her home, threatening her family, her children. I mean, we're just proud that she said that she is not going to be silent. She's going to keep doing it. She's going to keep standing up for our community. But I'm going to try and do something new this week. I have tried to get a video clip. There was an amazing interview with Antoine, my brother Antoine, who works for ITV. So I'm going to play it now, or hopefully it'll play now. And then we'll come back to this. This is the first time we're going to do this. We're trying to up the production values in this program, but please bear with me. It's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time just to get used to all this new system. So hopefully this should start playing.
A racist far-right death threat posted into activist Dr. Shola's home for simply speaking out.
We are notifying you of our intention to kill you and your family.
Shola, these are some serious threats, not just to you, but to your children. Just how did you react to this?
Rage. I felt so angry when I read that. Like, how dare they? How dare you? By the time I got to the end of the letter, my forethought was, how do I protect my family?
The letter states it's from National Action, a terrorist group banned in 2016 for their racist ideology and glorification of violence.
I'm going to speak right now.
Dr. Shola is a political activist and regular commentator on Good Morning Britain. The letter she received on Monday is littered with racial slurs and direct references to Dr. Shola's campaigning.
It's because people like me are speaking the truth in fighting white supremacy.
Dr. Shola believes the tone of British politics around institutional racism and immigration have re-energised far-right beliefs.
Using words like invasion to asylum seekers and refugees, especially those who come from ethnic minority backgrounds. It speaks directly to how British ethnic minorities are also treated.
India Willoughby, the UK's first transgender newsreader, also received a threatening letter. Just 2 years ago, a Metropolitan Police officer was sentenced for being a member of the banned group. But the problem goes beyond the capital. Figures show that nearly half of all counter-terrorism arrests in the year up to September 2022 were related to extreme right-wing terrorism.
Shola, you've received this letter to try and silence you, but if you were to give a message directly to the people that have sent this, or to anyone that agrees with it, what would you say?
I think it's important for them to understand this. I will not be silenced, and I will not be silent. I am not the problem here. You are. This country, the United Kingdom, we love so much, and the greatness you believe this country has was created, added to, expanded on by people like me and the ancestors of people like me. We belong here.
The police are aware of the letters and the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command are investigating. Antoine Allen, ITV News.
I'm hoping that came across okay and you can still hear me. That was...
Yeah, it was, we could hear you, I think. Well, I could hear you, and from my checks, I can tell that it did come over. It just shows you that these people, she's getting very close to the bone. That's why they're that upset. There's no way, if she wasn't telling the truth, then it wouldn't make any difference to these people. But we know that the sister, I mean, I'm so proud of her, honestly. She's just wonderful as far as I'm concerned. And yes, keep doing what you're doing, sis.
We've got your back.
We've got your back, absolutely. And also because this death threat is very public and we know who it's from, I'm hoping that the Metropolitan Police will take some kind of action.
Well, the police were sent to her home, and they've actually engaged their counter-terrorism unit, so they're assigned to it, and it's been given a high priority. But what's really interesting to remember is that natural action is actually a prescribed group, which means that they're illegal, and so this letter came from them. And you know, we've got to remember, we only spoke a couple of weeks ago about this report, which the Home Office sanctioned, saying that they mustn't focus on domestic extremism, that they mustn't focus on white supremacy.
Yes.
And so it's very interesting, isn't it, that the police are saying there is a real problem here. We're seeing letters, we're seeing evidence of this, where we have a Home Secretary in this country who's actually saying, no, let's target migrants, let's target Muslims, let's target everyone else apart from white supremacists. And that person who's saying that is themselves from a minority ethnic community in the UK. So no, it's a ridiculous situation. It's an outrageous situation. But yes, we have as much love for our sister Shola, and we have your back. And yeah. Okay, moving on to the next story. And I mean, this one, anyone who knows me knows that I am a great fan, and one of my spiritual role models is the amazing Pan-Africanist Thomas Sankara. And we've been following this case quite carefully over the last few years, actually. And this is a situation where we know that he was murdered by Blaise Compaoré, his best friend at the time, who he worked with in a coup to overthrow a military faction that seized control. He had done some amazing work while he was in power, renaming Burkina Faso. It was called Upper Volta first, into this name, which means the land of the upright men. He put through some amazing reforms. And he was what we call, people talk about decolonizing, but he was an original decolonizing anti-colonial activist doing right by African people. But he was murdered by a hit squad on the instructions of Blaise Compaoré in October 1987. And what's finally happened, it's hard to believe it's taken 30 years. But what's finally happened is that he's going to be, or he has been reburied alongside 12 other comrades who were assassinated in 1987. Now, it's quite tragic in many ways because his wife, Mariam, and the children didn't attend the reburial because they are quite upset that it took place, or he was reburied on a military site where he was assassinated. They would rather it wasn't there. But it's good that the ritual occurred, that he was reburied. I think his cousin was there, and there was a gathering that was there. And we spoke about the trial in last year, which ended with Compaoré and his allies being given life sentences. The problem now is, unfortunately, that Compaoré lives in exile in Ivory Coast. Now, he continues to deny involvement, but if he was ever to step foot back in Burkina Faso, he would end up in jail. This is when I kind of wish that Pan-Africanism was in place and that he couldn't hide in Ivory Coast, that he couldn't escape justice. He's on motherland and he should not be able to hide and live in comparative luxury for his brutal murder of one of our greatest leaders. So, it feels like almost like we remember, but actually it's just reporting back on the history and being aware that it might have taken 30 years, but we never forget, and we must never forget. And we'll continue to secure justice against those that would harm us. The next story.
Sorry, Toyin. Just before you get to the next story, we have a message from Shanti M saying, "Otep, beloveds," and they're sorry that they're late. But that's cool. It's no problem.
No worries. It's good to have you with us on the journey. So,
yes.
Now, the next story is that of our brother Colin Prescott, who's stepping down from his amazing work with the Institute of Race Relations, IRR as it's known. And there's a story going around in the media about how he has described the current training on unconscious bias as a nonsense. And he did say something along those lines, but that's not what he was actually saying. Our brother Colin Prescott, I've known him for many years. He's an amazing brother and sincere to the struggle. And he's been engaged in community work before I was even aware that there was a need for so much effort in community work. So after 43 years of conscious and stalwart dedication to our community, he deserves a break. So, of course, newspapers seek for the headline. They seek for the story that's going to kind of like get a lot of clickbait. And that's why this story about him saying that unconscious bias training is nonsense is the one that's going around. But that's not what he was saying. What our brother is saying is that for a long time, we've been dealing with institutional racism. And when people use buzz phrases like conscious or unconscious bias to kind of like define it, then what they're doing is deterring and distracting us away from addressing structural violence, addressing institutional racism. So, you know, he says that this happened in the 1970s. There was a term that was racial awareness. The term racial awareness was being used. And that's essentially what conscious bias is. It's the next generation of racial awareness. It doesn't mean training on those issues it's not important. Doesn't mean that, people don't always benefit from it. It just means that we have to recognize that we have to do both. We have to train and engage with individuals, but we must also and primarily focus on institutions, on structures that is repeating and reproducing these racist outcomes, this violent outcome over and over again. That's where the true nonsense is. But let's not conflate unconscious bias training as a means of dealing with structural violence and institutional racism. And that's the nonsense that our brother Colin is talking about. So, I mean, in many ways, this is something I would have really had in the last section as a tribute, and we salute our brother. But I know, Colin, it's unlikely after 43 years that he's going to just stop completely. He deserves a break, and I hope he does. He's an amazing man. But yeah, so that's that story. Another story which I learned about, and I give thanks so much for the researchers who share information with us for these programs every fortnight, because I don't catch all of these stories, and this is a really interesting one. And this is a tale of the calls by a local community group in Bristol to change an empty church. It's a derelict church, the former Seaman Mission Church and Institute, and they want to change it into a museum that addresses the issue of African enslavement. And I think this is an amazing idea. I was part of a panel when I was on friendlier terms with the Mayor of London. I was engaged with quite a few actors, different museum heads, different activists, Chazelle from African Remembrance, Arthur Torrington, Ope from Abolition 2007. There's quite a few of us engaged in this discussion about how do we create a museum that addresses the issue of enslavement without rendering our history only to enslavement. And it was a good discussion, and it looked like it was going to move forward. But unfortunately, as you probably learned, there's a lot of people who look like us and talk like us. But when it comes to putting their money, down on the table and actually helping us, doesn't matter what they call themselves, MP, Prime Minister, Mayor, whatever they call themselves, they often shirk away from the big decisions, the things that matter. So it's wonderful to hear about this decision, because this is actually, in some ways, kicking the ball over also to the church. You see, because this property has actually gone on the market for £500,000, £500,000, and this group, which is called the Abolition Shed Collective, said that turning it into a museum would actually help to heal divisions. And they're saying that this has to be done, because whenever slavery is raised as a topic in Bristol, there's always a pain. There's always this kind of sense of this open wound. So, the building, well, the church has been closed since 1987. It's not doing anything. This is a unique opportunity. Let's do something with it. There's also odes, and we're happy to put a corner for those engaged in abolition. It doesn't have to just be the negatives of enslavement. It can also talk about those who are engaged in fighting against it, those engaged in abolishing aspects of it. So this is, like I said, I think this is a very good story. I was completely oblivious to it. And this is one of the problems about us not thinking in Pan-Africanist terms. So those of us in London are completely siloed. We don't know what's going on with our family in Bristol, in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Leeds, in all the different regions all over. I didn't even go into Scotland and into Cymru or into Northern Ireland. We're everywhere, and everywhere where these kind of discussions are taking place, we have a stake in that discussion. And if there becomes some kind of poll or there becomes some kind of meeting, then it doesn't matter where we're based. We should also engage in those discussions and those debates, even if it means traveling down or joining Zoom meetings or whatever it is. That's how many other communities work and magnify and amplify their passion for social justice issues. It's something that we have to learn to do much better. And the next story is one that I thought, we would have, I won't say that we saw the end of this, because I'm thinking about the fair trade movement, but I did think that we'd actually put a massive dent into these kind of abuses that are taking place. Because I remember when I started Legali, the fair trade movement came onto the landscape maybe 10 years later, 5-10 years later, and it was pushing much about kind of like recognizing that ethical consumerism as a way to deal with some of these racist impacts. And so at the time, there was talk about, I think it was Ethiopia and coffee beans and how they're sourced, and the problems with Starbucks and all these kind of situations. And what this story is now about is that the tea that's being sold, the tea that's that people brew in England, and tea is one of the national drinks in the UK, is actually being produced on Kenyan farms where there's rampant sexual abuse. And I mean, it's just odd. It's 2023, and the tea that's being sold is going through brands like PG Tips or Lipton's or Sainsbury's Red Label. So what's happening is that those organizations, those companies are financing this, and then we as consumers are keeping it going. We're keeping the demand going. And I think many of us don't know. But the facts of this particular case is that more than 70 women on Kenyan tea farms, and most of those farms are owned by 2 British companies, have been sexually abused by their supervisors. This is something that's been reported by the BBC. There was some secret filming that was done, and it just showed that these plantations, and they are plantations, I don't like to conflate them to the forced labor camps that happened in the Caribbean and the other parts of the Americas, but these are plantations. But these plantations, which are owned by companies like Unilever and James Finlay, are putting pressure on these workers. And the reason we know this is because one of the undercover reporters was propositioned for sex. Now, 3 managers have been suspended because they were found out because of this this undercover reporter. So BBC journalism has actually done something good for a change. But this is the practices. These are the companies. This is what's making the tea that we're seeing in the shops that's being drunk. This is what's taking place in 2023. So all that stuff about fair trade, it's a great movement and it still has to continue, but the mission's not finished. The job hasn't been done. And so this has a direct impact. Our tastes and our consumers' behavior in Britain is leading to empowering British firms to employ and turn a blind eye to supervisors in Kenya that is sexually abusing women. That's a direct correlation. I just thought I'd share. This is the sort of thing that anthropologists should be doing, but I'm grateful that the BBC did it in this case. So, there's the other side of the coin. We talk about the lack of diversity. We spoke earlier about the Brits. Speaking about, I'm going to speak about other aspects where our lack of diversity is having a problem. But one of the things that I suppose is a good news, if you want to call it that, I don't know yet, we can only hope so, is that there has been a commission by Sky TV. I think it's their children's channel. They call it Sky Kids. We're not baby goats, but hey, you know this. To make a family show with an African family. So now this, what makes this really interesting is that the family have no previous training in TV production, but they do have a wonderful repertoire based on the books that they've self-published, the cartoons that they've made, and so, you know, Sky's taking this risk, and you know, there's going to be a story. It's going to be called Amma's Story, based on the Delula family. That's the family you see in Image. They're a mixture of Ghanaian and Nigerian heritage. They live in London, and in their day jobs, they work on child safeguarding, and another is a pilot, an airline pilot. So I'm looking forward and hopeful that it's going to be an amazing contribution to the cultural landscape of British television. So I suppose it is good news, but we don't know how it's going to result. We don't even know what's going to happen with the end result if they produce an amazing series, whether it actually be recognised by the industry. But it's a piece of news that we should share. Yeah, this one. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. This is about our young queen. Her name is Rayanne Duncan-Jones. She's 11 years of age, and her teacher just continuously, instead of calling her Rayanne, refers to her as Ryan, and just mixes up her gender. You know, I don't know if it's deliberate. They seem to think it's deliberate. It would seem to be so, referring to her as a he, as a him, and leaving her feeling totally embarrassed in front of her peers, her students. Now, this is taking place in the Bobby Moore Academy in Stratford, which is, you know, near, it's in East London. It's like minutes away from where I am, essentially. It's quite disgusting that this is taking place. It might seem like a low-level misdemeanor, misgendering papers. And this is what I worry about. Some of the people who are reporting on this will use misgendering as a way to attack people who define as trans and those who are sensitive about their pronouns. And that's not what this is about. You know, I don't think it's about that. I think this is about a level of insensitivity. It's also about bullying from teaching staff, if what we're hearing is correct. We know that there's a pending case of I've forgotten what it's called, the Thomas S. something school, where the young sister was assaulted while the head teacher just watched on and did nothing. So this is this ugly trend of bullying taking place in schools, not just by other students, which is something we expect in schools, but also in subtle psychological ways by members of staff. So, you know, I had to share this story, but we'll see how that goes. I remember my name being mangled at school. I didn't find it very funny at the time, and I didn't have the power and the confidence to stop it. So my name is Toyin. So, you know, you call me Toyin, but my teachers would call me Tony. Or, you know, they'd refuse to try to pronounce my name, and that anglicization of your name has an impact on you. It wasn't until I was an adult that I was able to push back against that and tell people, no, you call me Toyin. That is my name. Let alone the idea of being a young princess, finding yourself and your sexual identity, you know, your spiritual identity, all these aspects, and being misgendered by your teacher. It's ridiculous. This is an interesting story for those of us who are interested in environmental issues. I don't normally do what we call, or I tend to call, so-called first, and I'm going to put in quotation marks, first blacks stories. But this is actually an original story because it's actually about the first heat officer in Africa, who is a sister by the name of Eugenia Carbon. And she's based in Freetown, Sierra Leone. And it's an interesting post, never heard of it before, but what she does is raises public awareness about extreme heat and how to improve responses to extreme heat. So it's like heat waves, and climate damage which is caused by it. And she does this by collecting, analysing, and visualising the impact of heat on the city, which is home to over 1 million people. So it's a new post, heat officer. It's important because Freetown is increasingly threatened by very dangerous temperatures. And we saw a report in 2017 which ranked Sierra Leone as the third after Bangladesh and Guinea-Bissau as the countries most vulnerable to climate change. And this is where I talk about this being environmental issues. The countries that are not involved in rampant production or the climate damage of all these industrialized nations, which call themselves civilized, that have caused havoc on the Earth's ecological system, their actions have an impact on those who are not involved in that process, like Sierra Leone, like Bangladesh, like India, like Africa. And so this is why this story is interesting, because here we have a post being created to actually preemptively look into these things and try and mitigate against it. I should have, it's a tiny aside, and please forgive me with this one, but it just came into my mind right now. One of the things that was happening in Turkey, which I found very interesting, is that I think there's been over 100 arrests of people who were involved or supposed to have actually, who were involved in the constructions of building in Turkey that were supposed to be able to resist the earthquake or earthquakes. And the people, and including the government, and I'm not a fan of the Turkish Erdogan, he's an awful far-right character, but I am impressed with the fact that they've actually gone after these people who were supposed to ensure that the quality of the housing, of the building, was sufficient enough to give people time to escape, to be safe after an earthquake. And yet that doesn't seem to take place. It looks like there might have been a serious amount of corruption. And when I hear about that story, and I hear about how swift those people have been arrested, the first thing that comes to mind is Grenfell. That people are aware that there's a problem. Same thing with Grenfell. After Lakanal House, government ministers were aware that there was a threat of what would happen if cladding caught fire, because people had died. It wasn't just people got hurt; people had died in the past, and there was an inquiry into it. So people knew. Regulations were supposed to be put in place to make sure this could never happen again, and yet it did. We saw 72 plus people murdered, socially murdered, as Corbyn used the phrase, and John McDonnell used that phrase, and I like that. Socially murdered is a good way to explain structural violence in some ways. And we still see nothing. We see no justice. We see no ministers, nothing arrested for that. So seeing what happened in Turkey, where they've been arrested straight away, 100 people plus, is a good start. They need to look themselves in the face. They also need to look at government ministers involved and where the funds went. But this is why I say it's good that what's happening in Sierra Leone, where there's a heat officer who starts to look at these issues so that we can start trying to mitigate the damage of climate change, is actually a progressive act. And that's why this is in today's programme, even though it doesn't seem like it's related to UK news. It's a Pan-African story. And wherever we live, we need to hold those account who are in charge of our safety if they fall asleep on the job or engage in corruption, meaning that we're not protected. Long-winded rant over. Let me move on to the next story. And this one is, again, it's, I talked about Grenfell, we talked about structural violence. Well, another form of structural violence is what happened to the Windrush generation. And in this particular case, one of the victims of the scandal was Vernon Van Riel. And he's in the fight for compensation with the Home Office. He's taken it to the High Court after being left stranded and destitute in Jamaica for a decade. Now, he wants a level of compensation that is equitable for what he went through. He's 67 years of age. He's pursuing his legal claim. The government is refusing the Home Office, which is obviously, as you know, run by Suella Braverman. They're refusing to benefit for his loss of benefits after he was wrongly prevented from re-entering the UK. He came to the UK as a child. He was here in 1962. He was in poor mental health, unable to work, destitute and homeless in the 10 years after he was denied permission to return after a visit to Jamaica. He wasn't just a layabout, as these people like to claim. He was an ex-boxer, he was an electrician, so he's worked while he's been in the UK all his life. But that decision to refuse him citizenship is what's led to this claim. So we need to keep an eye on this, because people are starting to forget. That's why they said this solidarity with you is so important. People are starting to forget that this is an unresolved issue. What's happened to all those of our elders and their children who are living with the impact of this racist policy that's been taking place. And not everyone is asleep on the job. We have the wonderful Mark Wadsworth, who initially led a movement called, what was it called? Anti-Racist Alliance, some 30 years ago, which are pushing against racism in the UK. And he's now co-founded a new movement called the Liberation Movement, which is actually organising against attacks on migrants. And this is a really pressing case. He's decided to use the anniversary of his Anti-Racist Alliance to launch this, because he has seen an increase in some divisive, dehumanizing rhetoric from government ministers, not just Suella Braverman, but of course with her as Home Secretary. She's the lead cheerleader for using language which is responsible for stoking up hostility towards migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and all other vulnerable people, by describing their presence in the English Channel as an invasion. She uses this word, an invasion, and the far right love it. They're like, yeah, we got to fight back and push back. And I don't need to rehearse what we talked about last week, where you saw about the hotel where people were attacked. What I can talk about, however, which is directly related, is what's happened a few days ago in the Shamima Begum case. Whereas what's happened is this, it wasn't a trial, what they call it, a commission. This commission reviewed the decision made by the Home Secretary, it was Sajid Javid at the time, to deny her citizenship and to say whether it was legal. And their hands were tied. So they ruled back, saying that actually his decision was legal. But the police, not the police, the media is not looking deeper into their findings, which says that actually there's a case to answer when people say that she was trafficked, that she was groomed. We now know that the Canadian authorities had one of these undercover agents invested in trafficking her to Syria. So she was, this is a case of adultification, if ever there was one. But what's happened is, because this Home Secretary is actually engaged in rhetoric over ethics, who's actually abusing the rule of law and her position to push out these punitive judgments that have nothing to do with justice or fair trial or human rights, values that they clearly don't give a damn about. What's happened is that Shamima Begum, losing her citizenship and being made intentionally stateless, sets a precedent for all of us who have dual heritage, who have links to lands outside Europe. All of us are now vulnerable, even to some extent Eastern Europeans who have never been seen. They're seen as what they call dirty whites. They're not, they're not seen as the Nordic white. They're not seen as Western Europeans like the French or the Germans. They're seen as something other. But specifically those of us of African and Asian heritage, those of us who are visibly different, it means that if a Home Secretary decides that we are somehow a security risk, or we are not conducive to the public good, then they can deprive us of our citizenship. And this means that we are now, have been, quietly, no fuss, being relegated to second-class citizens in the UK. I was watching Question Time on this issue, and when people were making these kind of points, the audience was silent. There weren't many voices recognizing, or not recognizing, they recognized what had taken place. There weren't enough voices standing up for actually overturning this decision, for actually recognizing that Shamima Begum is British, for what that means. She was groomed in the UK. She was trafficked by actors with political deals with the UK. She should be able to return to the UK. She has no citizenship in Bangladesh. She has nowhere else to go. She lost 3 children. So I've been just talking about the Windrush case and talking about how that impacted us and what we saw happened, where elders in their 60s and 70s are still fighting the government just so they can get a little bit of compensation, not even reparation, just compensation, so that they can live a decent life in their twilight years. And then we have Shamina Begum, a literal baby who was trafficked when she was a child, not even sure of exactly what she's doing. If you spoke to a 15-year-old, you'll understand that they're still learning who they are. And she's been deprived of citizenship. This is not the rule of law. This is not justice. This is not, this. I don't know what this is, but all I do know is that, thank the ancestors that people like Mark Wadsworth are keeping his eye on the ball with this new liberation movement. There's a website which you can find, and I'll check it out. I think they're looking for like a donation to subscribe to them annually or something like that, and I'll do that straight after the program. And it's a coalition. It's not, just to be clear, it's an African-led coalition, the TLM. It's cross-party, multi-faith. It's been inspired by Black Lives Matter. They don't hide it. They're involved in anti-racism. They work with Africans. They don't differentiate. They're happy with if you've got Caribbean heritage or not. They work with other people with other backgrounds, whether they're Asian, anyone who's an ally, and people who are trade unions or involved in grassroots activism. Anyone who just basically wants to push back against this far-right extremism, which has been normalised and is now existent in both political parties, Labour and Conservative. That was a long missive, and perhaps I've got to stop lecturing while I'm delivering these programs. Probably a good reason why people who do education perhaps shouldn't read the news. But that's the context of that story. I'm not sure how much time we've got, actually. I'll keep going on. This is an interesting story. I can be very quick with this one. This is the plans for a super church in Ghana. Now, the president, Nana Akufo-Addo, he has been, what would you say, being pushed back. He's been put on pause about this. He argues that we should build this church. He's got David Ajay to design it. He's got big fanfare, locked up parts of Ghana while they're building it and stuff like this, and saying this is going to bring tourism in. This is the right for us as a Christian nation to promote Ghana as a welcoming space. It's going to be amazing. Meanwhile, while he's been trying to squander this £350 million on this 9-acre monstrosity, he's been arguing, what's been happening is that Ghana has effectively defaulted on repaying most of its external debt. Now, I believe, like St. Carlos says, that debt is illegitimate. But while you are deciding that you're part of that system and that you believe that you have it, then you don't default on it. And also what's happening in Ghana is there's actually a mounting, it's just escalating cost of living crisis. This is the same thing, what's happening all over the world. And so, is this a priority? Is this super church, this 350 million, 9-acre super church, a real priority of African people in Ghana? I think not. The good thing is that the decision to pause it, his opponents are pushing back. In fact, his opponents have this bizarre plan, which I think is bizarre. They argue that rather than use government coffers, which I believe, the government shouldn't be involved in making churches. That's my belief. They're arguing that what needs to be done is a plan, and this is what's been in development, for mass mobilization of Ghanaian people, like a rallying of, and this is their words, a rallying of 1 million Christians to donate $20 a month for 2 years. That's the plan to raise the funds to build this church. I want to leave it there. I think we have other priorities, but I'll leave that there. You are watching, listening, the whole doodah, myself, Sister Oleander. I think it's been a lot of me talking, actually. Sister Oleander, are you still there, just to make sure that you're still awake and I haven't put you to sleep?
Of course, I'm still here.
Oh, thanks. Nice to hear another voice. Any questions? Any comments come in, or
No, nothing else has come in as yet.
Okay. Well, I hope I haven't put everyone to sleep. I hope you're still listening, and I hope it's still informative. I'm going to go through some UK health-related news now. And the first story is one about STIs. And just like when you hear with Stop and Search and you hear with all metrics to do with our community living in Western nations, we tend to get the short end of the stick. And this new research has come out telling us that we have the highest rate of STIs in the UK, and nothing's been done to change that. I have a lovely graph for you to look at. You don't need to analyze it in much detail. What it's telling you is that we have disproportionately high rates of various STI diagnoses compared to Europeans. And it's also telling you, and this is just the data, that those of us with Caribbean heritage specifically had the highest rates for chlamydia, gonorrhea, herpes, and trichinosis. I don't even know what that last one is. In fact, most people hopefully don't know what any of them are. But these are the facts. Now, we've got to put this in context. All the data, Europeans still make up the majority of these new diagnoses. But when you look at it proportionally, then it's those of us of African heritage, which is the largest group, which is the fastest growing in this sector. This is a sector we do not want to lead in. This data comes from the UK Health Security Agency. And like I said, we don't want to be leading in STIs in the UK. These type of things often come back to bite us in the bum. Sorry for the poor pun, but they do. What tends to happen is that people start to put policy, they start to regurgitate stereotypes about us being sexually promiscuous and all kinds of foolishness. But my job is to share the news with you. And this is the data, it's new. Be aware of it. If we need to engage in sex education, we have to find out why we are in this highest rate, then that's a job that we must do. That's community work.
Okay, Toyin, there's a message from D that says, thank you for your channel. Very informative. Keep up the good work. Greetings from London.
Give thanks. I'm assuming it's Sister D. It could be Brother D, so I won't make an assumption.
Yeah, I don't know.
Appreciate that, D. And yes, it's nice to know we haven't put you to sleep. I'm going to continue with the story. The next one is more positive news compared to the previous one. And this is the fact that minority groups in the UK are no longer at a much higher risk of dying from COVID as we were during lockdown and the earlier waves. This is data coming from the ONS, that's the Office of National Statistics. They look at the rate of COVID-19 statistics and the deaths, and it's now substantially lower for us. Now, we know earlier during the pandemic, we were more likely, significantly more likely to die. We had this high mortality rate, but that's turned around. So it's taken 2 years for that turnaround to happen. So I said it's good news. The only thing I will say, which bugs me a little bit, we don't know why. Why has this mortality rate dropped? This is fantastic news, but why? I always want to know these kind of things. What's happening? What's changing? Is it the fact that COVID has morphed so many times? It's got so many variants that it's actually hit a variant where we are actually more stronger in dealing. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I'm making up these hypotheses for us to think about. Why is our mortality rate? Because if it can just go down like that, which is great news, then it can also go up. So, but I'm going to leave this there. Good news. Our mortality rate is going down, and seeing that this was the issue that led to the Creed report, the sewage report, as people often refer to it. This is the Commission into Racial Inequalities and blah, blah, the one that said that there's no institutional racism in the UK, by Tony Sewell, that kind of nonsense. That was instigated by the clown Boris Alexander DePiffle Johnson, based on the fact that we were dying at a faster rate, and they wanted to say it had nothing to do with racism. So the fact that it's going down now, I don't make the correlation that the fact the rate's going down means that racism is going down. That would be idiotic. But I still want to know why.
So, Toyin, I just want to give you a time check. We are at an hour.
Wow, how did you do that? How did you get someone at the front door when you said we are an hour? Magic. I hope one of the children are going to come and answer that. Yes, okay. I'll continue the news. Hopefully someone will answer that. This is it's a sad story, but it's also a warning. It feels like something that's made up, but it's not. Now, oops, I think Sister Oleander's grabbing the door. Now, the pastor Francisco Baraja lost his life in Mozambique after attempting what was known as the 40-day Jesus fast. Now, I know it sounds like it's a spoof, but actually this is real. This is what took place. He apparently, according to scripture, the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus had this 40-day fast, and he tried to replicate it. And after 25 days without food or water, he lost so much weight he couldn't stand up. And they rushed. His family was insistent that he had medical attention. They grabbed him. They took him. They rehydrated him with serums. They attempted to give him liquid foods, but it was too late. He lost his life. He passed away. He was aged 39. Now, I know people have strong faith and they believe in their faith. And I guess the reason why I thought I should share this with you is because it's not actually the first time that someone's attempted this. There are two instances, but the last one, the one actually, I can't remember. The last one was in 2015. I think that was in Kenya, but the one before that, in 2006, there was a woman who died halfway through a similar fast in London. So, I mean, there's something to be said about the amazing power of faith and people kind of like wanting to emulate Jesus. But a 40-day fast, I mean, like I said, he didn't make it after 25 days. And, just so you know, I can't remember the exact statistics. We can live without food probably for 40 days. The body would stress and it would lose a lot of weight. It would take energy from fat, etc. But we cannot live without water. This is, I think it's like 4 days before things start going crazy. We cannot live without water. So if anyone's kind of like thinking about using this as some kind of way to show their commitment to a faith, please do research before you engage in these kind of acts. This is not the first time, it's not the second time that this has happened. We have a history of following these texts to the letter and leaving behind traumatized family members, and in this case, a congregation. Then I thought I'd share with you.
Sorry, Toyin, before you go to the good news and tributes, Cosmic Jedi said, love the name, Cosmic Jedi. 40
name.
Days, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. And Mr. IC3 Black Race Code Chess says, big up.
Oh, give thanks to both of you. Yes, Cosmic Jedi, amazing name. And 40 days.
Sorry, I should have shown.
No, that's okay. 40 days. 40 days is just without water. I mean, it's tragic. So I don't really want to, but let's not copy those kind of behaviors, please. It's, like I said, it's not the first time. Let's not do that. Water is the nectar of life. And thank you, IC3. Big up yourself as well.
And also,
okay.
Sorry. And also, wait a minute, where is it now? Cosmic Jedi says, Asante for the name compliment. I too love the name.
Asante Sana. This is a great name. No, give thanks. Now I'm gonna move to the next section, which is what we call good news and tributes. And we're coming to the end of the program, so thank you for your patience and being with us, and for me going, I'll say a little overtime with that, but we had to add in some programs and some news articles just to kind of make it work. And let us know what you think about sharing the video clip. I'm not saying we can do that every time, but did that help? Is it redundant? Do we need to do that? Is it nice to find the odd clip here and there? Will it cause us problems with YouTube and Facebook? Who knows? But again, your feedback is your program. Those things are always useful. The first story is that of our sister, Michelle, I think her nickname was Annette Michelle Cox. And she won her employment tribunal against NHS England and Improvement, which is known as NHS and I, in a case where she proved, and I like to say that, she proved the case that she was being treated unfavorably because of ethnicity and because she was willing to speak up. I'm not going to go through everything that she went through, but she was the only African nurse in the North region in 2018 when she was appointed as a regional lead to what is the title, the Chief Nursing Officers, and this is their term, not mine, Black Minority Ethnic Strategic Advisory Group. So it's one of these groups that looks at policy and kind of gives advice and reforms it to make sure it's actually not institutionally racist. And so she did her job really well. She found irregularities. One example was that there was an independent review panel, and she spoke to those in charge and said, "Look, this independent review panel's got people who know each other, and they're part of our group. They shouldn't be there. It's not independent." And they shut her down. They kept on saying, "Oh, we checked it with legal. It's okay." They hadn't even checked it with legal. They just kept on ignoring her. She challenged this kind of institutional racism and kept on doing these kind of works, and they just kept on demonizing her. So in the end, she took this tribunal case against them. She was represented by the Royal College of Nursing. Big them up. She thanks them, and I thank them for their support. They won the case, and we're able to find out that she was subjected to things where her colleagues organised like away days, for example, not just once, twice, and ignored her, just didn't invite her. So, it's all these kind of microaggressions that take place behind closed doors in the NHS. NHS and Improvement is the section that she was working with. So, the good news is that she won the tribunal. And the point, and I love what she says, she makes it clear that we have to fight and we mustn't give up. And we must keep challenging institutional racism. And so I'm sorry that she had to go through this. It's horrendous and it's awful. But she inspires me, and I hope she inspires you and others to recognise that you have to fight. I took an employment tribunal against City Hall, Mayor of London. I didn't win, but we still need to try. We still need to keep trying. Every time they try and do these things, we have to expose them. And sometimes what happens, as was probably what happened in this case, whether we win or lose, the process of taking them to the tribunal, taking them to court, means that they make changes which improve the outcomes and experience for those who come behind us. We might not be the beneficiaries of our actions, and that's okay. Well, it's not okay, but that's what happens. We have to accept that, and I accept that going in, and I'm sure for our sister accepts that going in. But I am thankful, and I give thanks for her doing this kind of work, and for the ancestors as well. She was successful. Let's hope she gets a chunk out of them and a public statement out of them where they have to, acknowledge their wrongdoing, because I don't like these things being behind closed doors. The next story is one about our sister, Rosamundu Adudu Kisi Deborah, and there's no new progress on her campaign for Ella's Law, and this is a campaign against pollution in London, because her daughter lost her life, Ella, who the law's named after. She's still fighting 10 years on. And, she's just saying that she's not going to apologise for her work. She's going to keep doing it. Again, it's just want to acknowledge her, really. We just want to recognise her work. The conclusion of the inquest that found out that Ella had been a victim of air pollution that cost her her life was only announced in 2020. So, we've only known about this in the public for like the last 2.5 years, but she's been fighting for 10 years. And even though I do have a bit of reservations about how politicians are jumping on Ella's law to rinse people, to make money out of fears around climate change. So things like the ULEZ zone being expanded, which has nothing really to do with protecting the air quality of Londoners, but everything about revenue generation. It makes me sick to see these kind of things going on under the name of trying to help people, when essentially it's just about capitalism. And so, sometimes I see her being wheeled out on the news to talk about Ella's law and linked to those kind of stories. And we mustn't forget that the underlying message, despite the propaganda aspect that takes place when we engage in this, is that sometimes we just have to keep fighting, and we have to keep focused on what it is that we're calling for. And also, we have to be mindful of the politicians who try to exploit us. That's really key. So we make tribute. This is a story from the US, but we're a Pan-African program, and it's the reason why it's included is because if we don't keep focused on campaigns for justice, and I know it's a horrible thing to say that we have to fight for years and years and years and decades to secure justice, and that's awful. That's not justice. I mean, that's abuse. But that's where we are right now. We have to do this. And in this particular story, our brother Elder now, he's aged 50, Lamar Johnson, has finally been freed 28 years after he was wrongfully convicted of murder. I mean, he spent 28 years in jail. It's like Nelson Mandela's sentence. And it's for a murder that he always denied committing. And I mean, it's great that he's been released. It's great that the judge has acted and recognised that he should never have been in prison. But let's be clear about this. He's been released because 2 witnesses have provided clear and convincing evidence that our brother was innocent. He's been released because another inmate has confessed that he shot and murdered the person that our brother was convicted for, along with another suspect. So there's something about this that makes me feel, I mean, I'm so happy that he's out there. But if these others hadn't stepped forward, then that 28 years could easily have been doubled up to another, 56 years. He's 50 years of age now. He's lost 3 decades of his life. Anyway, this is America. And, I had to include this because there's been talks in the UK about bringing back the death penalty and the death sentence. And I know that the Home Secretary agrees with it. This is Suella Braverman. I know that the Justice Minister, I don't know if he's still Justice Minister, that bully Dominic Raab believes in it. There's many of them who believe in bringing back the death penalty. And this is the reason why we must never support calls for the death penalty, because there are times when people, when Africans have been fit up and set up. We spoke about Jenga for crimes that we didn't commit. And if the state murders innocent people, and then we find DNA evidence or forensic evidence or testimony afterwards, we can't ever reverse that wrong. Anyway, it's good news. Perhaps I should have had this in the regular news section, but it is good news he's been released, but the implications are something that's quite deep.
Toyin, so Malcolm X's family, Dee says, Malcolm X's family plan to sue the FBI, CIA, NYPD for his death.
Yeah, thank you, Sister Oleander, and thank you, Dee, for sharing that with us. I had seen that, and I hadn't had a chance to go through all the ins and outs of that, and I'm very biased. So, I mean, that is good, and I've heard about them looking to take the state, to court about this and the FBI. So I don't know what the outcome is going to be of that. I don't know what stage it is right now. But this is the thing, that African proverb, the passage of time does not lessen the crime. As long as we, in perpetuality, remain linked to our spirituality, then even if we become ancestors, we pass on. It's one of the reasons why I do this program. It doesn't matter if only one person was watching. If it's recorded and it's passed on to our children or our children's children, our children's children, and they learn about an injustice and they deal with it, then that's how it works. That's how the ancestors work for us. So let's hope that the family of Malcolm X secure justice. But we have to be vigilant and never let go of that fight.
Absolutely.
I'll move on to the last few stories. The next one is that of, and this is a really interesting one. It's our brother Thomas Comerell, and I say our brother. He's an ancestor now. This is the story about a new exhibition that's going to be taking place in the New York Historical Society organization, which is on his life and legacy. And the reason why this is an interesting story and why it's a fascinating story is because for centuries, actually, I was going to say decades, but it's actually centuries. Many people had assumed that the pottery and the works of Thomas Comerell was produced by a European. But that's not the case. In 2010, there was a scholar by the name of Brian Zip, and he found out and revealed that he was actually an African. He wasn't just a potter. He was a freed African. He achieved freedom in 1779 in the 18th century. He was a fierce abolitionist. He contributed to many political debates about our freedom. In fact, he was so passionate about our people, he attempted to found a free African nation. But for many years, we weren't aware of that because we thought he was a potter who just made some beautiful and important crafting and was European. And so this new exhibition that's taking place in New York is going to shed light on his life and his legacy. It's been run by and put together, curated by Margie Hoffer, and we give thanks for that. And Margie makes that this is a cautionary tale, not to make assumptions about identity. That's what this exhibition is really about. We have been involved in everything on this planet, everything in the history of humanity. And a lot of the things that people give credit to other community groups too are often wrongly attributed. So this exhibition is going to run until May 28th. I know it's in New York, but those of you who are watching internationally, we do have the internet. If you get a chance, go by and check it out and say thank you to the team for putting it on. I'd like to learn more about Thomas Comerell, especially his engagement in political debates in the 18th century. Never heard of his name. It's amazing to think that he was rendered onto team whiteness for so many hundreds of years. Now, the last story we're going to close with, which is definitely a tribute, and you probably won't see this on mainstream media. I think Channel 4 did something, and this is about our young brother, Jason Ade. I was fortunate to attend his inaugural speech at the Leading Roots event. Where was it held? It wasn't held at UC. I think it was in the Welcome. I think it was in the Welcome building. It was so amazing. It was so inspiring and uplifting. But this story is just basically recognizing the fact that he's going to be Cambridge University's youngest ever African professor. Now, he's 37 years of age. He was diagnosed with autism at a very young age. He wasn't unable to speak until he was 11 years old. He couldn't read or write until he was 18. But he didn't allow that to stop him progressing. His presentation was amazing. He spoke about the role of music in his life, in pushing him forward, and he created to his soundtrack of his life, different tracks and the meanings and how it inspired him to go forward. and he's now achieved a status, and it's, you know, it is amazing. You know, I mean, I don't often share this, but I was one of these so-called late developers as well. For a very long time as a young person, I didn't speak. My parents became worried, my father in particular, and I remember taking me to a specialist to try and find out why wasn't Toyin speaking. Why wouldn't he engage with the world? What was wrong? Why wouldn't he not talk? And now you can't shut me up. People often get written off when they're young people, when they refuse to engage, or when there's something going on. In our brother Jason's case, you know, he was diagnosed with autism. But this is, for me, a wonderful testimony to end on, about the power of belief, of having confidence and have faith, and having seen value in every single human being, seeing the potential in every single human being, not reducing them to skin color, not reducing them to ethnicity, not reducing them to gender or sexuality or any of these traits. So I think I'll end on that note and big up our brother. I'm not so much fussed about, you know, it being Cambridge University and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's nice. I'm not, you know, first. I don't do those kind of things. But credit where credit's due, and you know, and this is an inspirational story. So I'm going to leave that there. Thank you for listening.
There's a message here from Cosmic Jedi. This is an important topic and news to end on. Absolutely. I'm so proud of this young brother with all those challenges that he's had and that he's lived through. And he's so young and he's achieved so much. It's, you know, his family must be super, super proud, and so they should be.
Yeah, and even now, resting on his laurels, you know, he makes it really clear that he's got so much work to do to continue to diversify the landscape. He talks about the institutional racism within the educational sector, which I can testify to. But he's not just thinking, I've arrived now, I can pull the ladder up. He's like, now I'm here, I'm going to do whatever I can to open the door and eradicate this institutionalized racism.
Wonderful.
So it's amazing.
Yeah.
So we're going to close this as ever. Sorry, let me move to the last slide and end it with a massive thank you. And that's to you out there listening. That's to our brother Colin, Sister Amo, our researchers, you know, providing information as well. We couldn't do any of this without you. I'd like to acknowledge and give credit where credit's due. Give thanks. You know, this is essential. You know, this week I was up and down the country, seminars, lecturing, the whole lot. I couldn't have pulled this together. I couldn't do this. You know, we only managed to make these things happen with all of you teaching. I know that some of you are sharing this inside your WhatsApp groups as well, and give thanks for that. I'm all for that social media, and you know, if the knowledge gets out and it helps someone, and that's because you're sharing in your little way, even on Facebook or YouTube, all of that helps, because it raises awareness of our community and inspires us, and it makes us aware of what's going on, so we know to watch the pitfalls. Then our job is done. So
absolutely. So Toyin, sorry, there are 3 last messages, if you don't mind, before we close. So Cosmic Jedi says, I've recently realized that the importance of true self-discovery is very, very important.
Yeah, it's a foundation. Know thyself.
Yes. And he goes on to say, because the better we know why we are and what we are, the better everyone's life becomes.
Yeah, agreed.
And also, the both of you know me well, lol. So just reminding you.
Okay. All right, well, hopefully that will become more clear as you'll probably catch us on the street or something, bump into us. But no, give thanks for supporting us and being there and watching the program and sharing your wisdom as well. This is a collective issue, a collective enterprise. I should say I'm actually really playing hard with the idea of bringing back the Legali newsletter. And, I had to find a way to do it, like maybe, you know, find some writers and stuff who will get engaged in doing this. But it's something as well I'm thinking about doing, because we need this news. We need to know this stuff continuously. And this program is just one way of doing that. But
Mm.
I'm going to leave that on. That's a discussion for another day. I want to give thanks for Legality supporters. Those of you who still make donations, amazing, and purchase my Revelatory, the poetry book, the other day, and that's in the post. Well, it's not in the post, but it'll be in the post tomorrow. Your support, Beauty Years is going to be screened in a cinema in a couple of weeks' time. I'm really humbled by those of you who engage and who kind of want to help out in these ways of supporting what we're doing. But as ever, we'll be back. The next day is on the 12th of March 2023. I don't know, Sister Oleander, I don't know if you have any closing words.
Just to say, as the elders would say, walk good, and just just keep the faith, whatever that is for you. Mother Earth is changing now. We're soon going into spring. Walk in nature, walk near some water, notice what the changes are in Mother Nature, the new buds, the new growth. Try and grow your own food, There's lots of things to say, but stay healthy.
Yeah, definitely. And whatever you do, be kind, be loving. And as ever, may the ancestors continue to guide and watch over us. Ashe.
Sure.